And with the Trump administration and the president's forthcoming trip to China, his desire to maintain a relationship with Xi Jinping, it isn't inconceivable to me that he would agree to let a few Chinese ships by, at least at this point. And we don't know how long this point is going to last, because as you said a minute ago, it does look as if there will be another round of negotiations.
Now, President Trump has said talks between the US and Iran could restart in the next 2 days. He's spoken to the New York Post and said something could be happening over the next 2 days, and we're more inclined to go there to Pakistan. Meanwhile, US Central Command has posted on X that more than 3,500 sailors and Marines are joining the blockade of Iran's ports. Let's talk to Elliot Abrams, who's a former special representative to Iran under President Trump. He was also Deputy National Security Advisor. Good evening to you, Elliot.
Good evening. Hi.
Great to have you with us. Let me ask you first of all about this blockade. What is your understanding of how it's working? It seems to be not, as President Trump originally said, a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, but just a blockade of Iran's ports.
Right. Well, first let me say I think it's confusing, because we hear that there's a blockade and then we hear actually a couple of dozen ships may have gone through. I think the basic idea is a simple one. It is that it cannot be right that Iran is able to import and export through the Strait of Hormuz, but prevents any other country from doing so. The Arab countries on the other side of the Gulf, and of course their buyers or suppliers around the rest of the world, so that won't be permitted. It isn't clear to me that the blockade is even fully in effect, because there is another account that we're waiting for the aircraft carrier group, the George H.W. Bush, to arrive on station. But even if it's delayed, then the intention is that after a few days, there will be a blockade of Iran's ability to use the Strait of Hormuz.
And we were hearing earlier the suggestion that actually the Iranian Navy presence is not in the Strait of Hormuz itself, but that any ships that were thought to have been breaching the terms could then be stopped and boarded outside that narrow waterway, where presumably they would be potentially vulnerable to attack.
I think the greater vulnerability will be in the Gulf. I think you're right, not exactly in the Strait, because this group of American ships is outside the Persian Gulf. We don't have a big naval presence inside right now. So I would think if the Iranians want to fight outside, they will be quickly and easily defeated. But inside the Gulf, it's a different story.
And is it clear to you, the ships that have got through, I mean, there was one report that suggested that 2 of them were Chinese ships. Is it clear to you whether these ships have been allowed through by the US?
It is not clear. And with the Trump administration and the president's forthcoming trip to China, his desire to maintain a relationship with Xi Jinping, it isn't inconceivable to me that he would agree to let a few Chinese ships by, at least at this point. And we don't know how long this point is going to last, because as you said a minute ago, it does look as if there will be another round of negotiations. Maybe they get somewhere.
I mean, does this blockade amount to anything? If you've still got hundreds of ships that are not quite clear what's happening, so they're not passing through the Strait of Hormuz, and we see, don't we, those satellite images which show dozens and dozens of tankers and other vessels just waiting, not passing through that narrow stretch of waterway, and yet somehow 6 ships have gone through. Is it clear what this blockade is even achieving?
It isn't clear yet. And I think there's a real question here. What is the president trying to do? And I think the answer is he's trying to blockade Iran, just so that they can't take advantage of the strait. we can do that. And it may be that we are not doing it yet, but certainly the naval power is there to prevent Iran from using the strait.
So we're hearing now that there could potentially be further talks between US and Iran. I mean, do you think that there is a realistic prospect of the two sides actually coming to an agreement to halt the war?
Well, I think after this first round, there is going to be another round. It may not involve exactly the same people. Will Galibaf go? Will Vice President Vance go? Unclear. But I do think both sides are trying to avoid a return to war. The question is whether they can find, of course, a ground of compromise. The president, I think, wants to, for all sorts of reasons, economic reasons, oil prices, the stock market, the elections in November here. I think he wants to. But he was a terrible critic of President Obama's 2015 agreement with Iran. He can't do that again. He can't make himself open to the criticism. You said Obama's was the worst deal in the world, and then you did the same thing. Therefore, he's got to get better terms. I don't know whether better terms are going to be available.
Yeah, there are reports that the US asked Iran for a 20-year moratorium on all uranium enrichment. And Iran has apparently said that it could suspend all enrichment, but just for 5 years. I mean, if they've reached that stage, does that sound to you as though there could be scope for coming to some kind of a deal?
Yes. I mean, between 5 and 20, obviously you could compromise halfway. And that is better than the Obama deal because under the Obama deal, Iran was permitted to enrich. So you'd be pushing off any enrichment for quite a long time. One could also compromise on the question of the 440 kilos of highly enriched uranium. We say it has to get out. The Iranians say, well, no, we can blend it down to a lower level of enrichment. You can compromise on that too. You know, 2/3 of it is taken out of Iran, 1/3 is down blended, or vice versa. It's harder, I think, to think about what would be the compromise on Iranian support for terrorist groups like Hezbollah and the Iranian ballistic missile program, which it is the American view they should not rebuild.
And isn't there a risk then, if they reach some kind of deal on Iran's enrichment of uranium, and you somehow have President Trump claiming victory, that he's leaving in place Iran, which still has those supplies, which we know that it has built up. None of them seem to have been touched during the war. Although many of Iran's leaders have been killed, you still got essentially the same regime in place, despite President Trump's talk of regime change. And you have, of course, caused a huge amount of instability and uncertainty for those Gulf states. I mean, isn't that just the risk that just leaves the entire region in a far more dangerous and unstable place than it was before?
Well, if you end up with an Iran that reliably promises no enrichment for, say, 15 years, 15 years without a nuclear program, and it has a much weaker military right now already, then I would say the region is not in a worse position. It's in a better position because it's got a much weaker Iran, which presumably would also promise to stop supporting terrorist proxies. My fear is a different one, and that is, suppose you do that kind of deal, and in exchange, the United States lifts sanctions, thereby enriching the regime. What you've not talked about or covered at all is the Iranian people who rose up in January and were murdered by the thousands, who clearly want a different regime. But if the lifting of sanctions enriches the current regime, presumably its life is elongated. So we would be essentially saying to the Iranian people, well, too bad. We're making a deal with the regime.
And that, I'm sure, for many Iranian people, they would be seen as something of a betrayal by President Trump, wouldn't they?
Yes, the man who said help is on the way.
We've got Rachel Reeves, the British Chancellor. I think she's just arrived in Washington tonight at a meeting of the International Monetary Fund. She said that she's frustrated and angry that the war has sent oil prices soaring, and it's hurt the economy here in Britain as well as in many other countries around the world. And she's accusing President Trump of going into this war without a plan, without a clear exit plan, and without a plan for what he wanted to achieve. Do you think she's got a point?
She certainly has at least a partial point. The planning that went into this is unclear. The president did not make a speech to the nation at the beginning, explaining exactly what the goal was. I would say I don't think those remarks that you just quoted are going to improve U.S.-UK bilateral relations or the president's view of NATO any. That's unfortunate.
Elliot Abrams, former special representative to Iran under President Trump, the former deputy national security advisor. Good to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.